If the medium is the message, John's eloquence, I think, conveyed the message of eloquence that St. Augustine so aptly lays out. And I don't often leave the 21st century, so somehow, again, building bridges between recovering and restoring what's in the tradition to think about what we're facing sort of in the modern age. So I just have a couple remarks to get us started, and then I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Anthony Monta, who will join us in just a moment. So here we sit in the Martin Media Center, this sort of vast multimedia production facility with multiple studios and control rooms and editing bays. And it's actually home to 5 different production groups. So we do a lot of media production around. Notre Dame does their marketing media production here, the educational media, sports media, and religious media. So those are all incorporated into this large, really state-of-the-art broadcast facility, multimedia facility. And so it's a fitting environment, I think, for our discussions this week, embedded deep within the belly of this kind of broadcasting behemoth. We'll consider the question of how to best teach the art and science of media and communication, given all of these marvelous new affordances. And we'll add to that question how best to do that in light of the Catholic intellectual tradition. So we begin from the premise that the resources necessary for navigating this environment are not waiting to be discovered. Rather, they're waiting to be rediscovered and represented. And that's why you're here. So like the Magi, you've traveled far to present or represent a series of intellectual gifts that have been very carefully crafted over time. And in service of the Word made flesh, you have come in the flesh to share your words with us so that we may come to a deeper understanding of this important time in the history of the church, the university, and the culture. So along with our teachers and pastors, religious leaders, and media professionals who are observing these proceedings, we welcome our 15 faculty from several different disciplines, including theology, literature, media studies, political philosophy, rhetoric, sociology. And despite these diverse backgrounds, I think we share in a common task, which is how to extend the gifts and riches of the church's intellectual tradition into the digital age. So in 1955, then president of Notre Dame, Father Ted Hesburgh, said that the university cannot, quote, no more ignore television today than the universities of the past could have ignored the discovery of printing. 1955 was the same year that Notre Dame acquired its own broadcast television station, WNDU, which sits on the west edge of campus. And so over 6 decades later, here we sit in a studio far more advanced technologically, and we might say, like Father Hesburgh, that the university can no more ignore digital technology than the universities of the past could have ignored television. And yet, despite all of this technological progress, it's not clear that we've kept pace in our ability to understand all of media's social, psychological, and ethical consequences. Like a fish that's not aware of the water it's swimming in, we are immersed in the media environment that's become second nature to us. And its obviousness, ironically, leads to a fair degree of obliviousness. We're certainly not ignorant of the content of our media, how to consume it, produce it, analyze it. But these are all figures. These aren't the ground. And as Pope St. John Paul II said in The Rapid Development, quote, we're dealing with a complex problem because the culture itself, prescinding from its content, arises from the very existence of new ways to communicate with hitherto unknown techniques and vocabulary. So John Paul II directs our attention away from the torrent of text and image and points instead to the new techniques and their ability to shape culture, a point that was later taken up by Pope Francis in Laudato Si, where he describes the nature of the technocratic paradigm. So what does the Catholic Church and the university have to offer this information age? I think it's nothing less than a deeper exploration of this new psychological ground. The information age is more than about just information. It's about interior transformation. The interior senses of the human soul are being formed by our exposure to new media techniques. So the church and the university must ask, formed for what? If we leave this task only to the university, then the universities are apt to succumb to the pressures that come with higher education in the modern age. That is, how to train rather than form students to do the work that keeps the information economy running. This narrow view ignores these deeper philosophical, moral, and ethical questions that come with any great technological change. We can no longer be certain that the university curriculum is being designed to address these questions in a way that keeps pace with the changes or provides the necessary room for reflection that such a change invites. So in 1955, when Father Hesburgh dedicated the new TV studio, he invited David Sarnoff, who was then chairman of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, to receive an honorary degree at Convocation. And Sarnoff called his address the moral crisis of our age. He said in that speech that we are too prone to make technological instruments the scapegoats of the sins of those who wield them. The products of modern science are not in themselves good or bad. It's the way they're used that determines their value. Marshall McLuhan famously picked up that line from Sarnoff's speech at Notre Dame and quoted him in the opening of his book, Understanding Media. Rather than agreeing with Sarnoff, McLuhan said Sarnoff was the voice of the current somnambulism, that of a sleepwalker. Media tools are not morally neutral because they're extensions of human beings who are themselves morally ambivalent creatures, engaged in a perpetual struggle between good and evil, playing out in all corners of our cultural activity, most especially in the ways that we communicate and mediate that communication. Sarnoff ends his address with this question: who can best alert and guide humanity under the new conditions? He says the scientist and the politician are not up to the task. It's religion, the church, that has the greatest responsibility and finest opportunity to direct the way. The final test of science and technology, Sarnoff writes, is not whether its accomplishments add to our comfort, knowledge, and power, but whether it adds to our dignity as men, our sense of truth and beauty. This was the chairman of the board of RCA speaking, arguably one of the most powerful media figures of the 20th century. Where are the similarly minded media leaders today? Some of them are in this room. In addition to our invited faculty, we're joined by an illustrious group of Catholic media professionals, teachers, pastors, who embody the notion that their faith and their communications vocation are intimately intertwined. The future leaders are also getting ready to enroll in your fall classes. What will you teach them? How will you guide them? How might we, as a group of concerned religious communicators and teachers, explore these questions in a way that leads to a comprehensive vision of understanding and teaching media and communications that comes from the heart of the church, ex corde ecclesiae. At the McGrath Institute for Church Life, our mission is to help build the bridge between the academy and the church. And in some ways, it's a restoration project because it harkens back to the origins of university education that grew out of the heart of the church to begin with. As Father Hesburgh put it in 1981, when he was helping found this institute, he said he had a great hope that one day when someone writes the history of this university in this period, there would be a few paragraphs about how one university began to see itself in a very special way in service of the church that gave it birth, and in which we find our subsistence and grace, unquote. A church that reveals to us so many beautiful icons of communication, the Holy Trinity, the sacraments, Mary, the mediatrix of all graces, Christ, the Word made flesh, the Eucharist. This is our starting point for developing a pedagogy that responds to the digital conditions in ways that are both critical and creative, in ways that are oriented toward greater communion with both God and our fellow man. We begin our work in the trenches with a session called Institutions at the Forefront of Curricular Development. These are places that have been brave and bold enough to articulate that and practice an approach similar to what I'm describing. From places as far-flung as Rome, where Daniel Arasa helps lead a graduate program in church communication, in Barcelona, where Alba Sabate Gauchax is involved with a research center working at the nexus of media, religion, and culture, and as close by as right across the street at Holy Cross College, where Anthony Monta, who will begin our session this morning, formerly of Notre Dame's Nanovic Center for European Studies, will take on what I think is the enviable task of creating a joint English and communications curriculum for a college seeking to enhance its Catholic identity and mission. We'll follow that session this afternoon with one entitled Exploring the Relationship Between Form and Content, where we'll look at specific pedagogical approaches currently being used in the classroom by Father John Walk at Santa Croce's Church Communication Program in Rome, Father Paul Sukup in the heart of Silicon Valley at Santa Clara University, and in our own backyard with our resident Anglican and maybe soon-to-be Catholic, Reed Schuchart at Wheaton College in Chicago. Tomorrow morning, we'll ascend a little further into the theoretical with a session looking at spiritual formation and freedom in the digital environment. With the able guidance of political philosopher James Poulos, theologians Luis Vera and Nadia Delicata, we'll look at the changing patterns of perception that we're experiencing under digital conditions and how they affect memory, religious formation, and our sense of identity in the church and in the polis. Tomorrow afternoon, we visit the question of literacy in the digital age. As Father Walter Ong put it, we've moved beyond the eras of orality and literacy and entered into a new era of secondary orality, and now we might even say secondary literacy, wrought by these new media. This necessarily requires a new approach to how we produce, consume, and analyze communication that's both human and machine-based. Danielle Zupan-Jerome will show us how a theology of communication gives a stable footing for navigating these new literacies, while John Yasso will do the work of presenting the gifts of a rhetorical literacy that dovetails with Danielle's theological vision and John's opening remarks today. Notre Dame's Ernest Morel has developed an indispensable, I think, critical literacy that comes from his illustrious career in English and literacy education that we will all be poorer for not having heard due to his illness. And we ask you to pray for Ernest as he undergoes chemotherapy treatments for cancer that was discovered not too long ago. We'll conclude on Thursday morning with a return to the trenches with Father Jordi Pujol, who will give us some guidance on a way forward for the church and her relations with a frequently antagonistic press. Is there any hope for building trust and promoting positive messages in the media? Father Jordi says yes. Craig Meyer will carry this theme forward by placing it in its proper historical and rhetorical context. It's always the context that shapes effective rhetoric and messaging, so Dr. Meyer will give us a helpful map of that contextual landscape. Joining Dr. Meyer and Father Jordi will be Dr. Dennis Calley, who will take up the theme of context and consider it in the homiletic. How would preaching be taught under digital conditions? The synthesis of all this work, God willing, will be an emergent pedagogical vision that can serve as a blueprint for educators who seek to integrate the church's wisdom and tradition in a meaningful way. Provided we're able to secure the next round of Lilly funding, one of the fruits of this symposium will be a series of workshops and courses for leaders in universities and in ministry and education who are seeking a more robust pedagogy for teaching and understanding media in their particular context. In the near term, we hope this week's discussions edify your own work and sharpen your own thinking. And please know that Notre Dame's McGrath Institute intends to remain a faithful supporter of your important work in both education and professional media. So honoring Father Hesburgh's and John Cavadini's vision for the McGrath Institute to restore the vital connection between the university and the church, we embark on a great construction project, one that with the assistance of the Holy Spirit will result in a new bridge, a pontifex, if you like, between the church and the academy. So thank you for coming. Let's get started.